Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Authors and ARCs. I'm Donna Seaman, Adult Books Editor at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. A link to today's title list, which includes NetGalley and Edelweiss links to e-ARCs of all the titles presented today, was included in the reminder email you received from Zoom an hour ago. To download it, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the link. If you have any trouble accessing the title list, please contact us at webinars@booklistonline.com. You are in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. And last but not least, Booklist offers closed captioning on all our webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned above. From there, you can select Show or Hide subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting Subtitle Settings. Okay, so yes, today we have the pleasure of hearing from Michael Paul Koslowski, author of Scarecrow Has a Gun from Eberfex Books, Lydia Millett, author of Dinosaurs from W.W. Norton and Company, and Anastasia Zadyk, author of Blurred Fates from She Writes Press. Each author will speak, and then we will all have a conversation. So first, yes, we will hear from Michael Paul Koslowski. Michael is a former high school English and film teacher. Writing as MP Koslowski, he is the author of 4 fantastical children's books: Frost, Juniper Berry, Rose Coffin, and the Dyreville Tales. Michael lives in New York with his wife, 2 daughters, and a rescue beagle named Huxley. When he's not reading or playing chess, he continues to write everything from poetry and screenplays to short stories, articles, philosophical essays, and books for readers of all ages. Scarecrow Has a Gun is his first novel for adults, a work constructed in the aftermath of a chaotic and failed attempt to capture in memoirs the tribulation of his childhood, which continues to haunt him. And yet, Michael has not yet given up his lifelong dream of becoming a stand-up comic. Michael, we're so glad you're here today.
Hi, thank you for having me. Okay, so my name is Michael Paul Koslowski, and my novel is Scarecrow Has a Gun, which I would categorize as a paranoid thriller along the lines of Don DeLillo and J.G. Ballard. Although this is my first adult novel, as MP Koslowski, I've written 4 children's books, 3 of which were middle grade and 1 young adult. They are Juniper Berry, Frost, Rose Coffin, and the Dyreville Tales. But ironically enough, when I first started getting the idea for Scarecrow Has a Gun, I was actually writing a memoir at first. And the memoir was about my childhood, and it was very important to me. And as I was thinking, going back through my recollections and questioning my family about similar events, I started realizing that we had different interpretations of what happened. We have different memories, and it really started weighing on me, saying, how could we have experienced the same thing and come away with completely different experiences? So that's where I started going with the book. The main character is Sean Whittlesey, And he was there when his wife was murdered, although he can't remember anything about it because sometime during the conflict, he was hit over the head and he suffered retrograde amnesia. And this has really plagued him. Well, one, obviously, he wants to know who killed his wife. But aside from that, he's struggling with why wasn't he strong enough to protect her? How did it all come about? And he keeps trying to fit these pieces that don't seem to fit. And this plagues him for about almost 2 decades. And when he's finally ready to move on from this, move past this, he meets someone else. He has a young daughter. Something happens at his job that changes his life forever. His boss is his name is Mr. Archibald Olger III. He is a entrepreneur, CEO, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the country, if not the world. And he puts on these sadistic games at his office, which is only for the widowers like himself. And sometimes they're benign games, sometimes they're Simon Says or musical chairs, but sometimes they're very violent, like bare knuckle boxing. And whoever wins these games gets a piece of technology that is revolutionary, that is not available to the public yet, which always brings me to the quote by William Gibson, "The future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed." Now, he names all the people who have won in the past, and these people have gone on to become senators and congressmen and CEOs, just very rich and powerful. So everyone's motivation to win is amped up. And even though Sean is about to leave, he wants to just put all this stuff behind him. In his last bout, he wins the Memory Palace. The Memory Palace is a machine that can play any memory that you've ever had. Not always in order, because it's a prototype, it jumps around, but anything that you experience, whether you remember it or not, will be replayed on a screen for you. And as he's watching these memories, he's realizing that things aren't lining up with how he remembered them. Something's off. It's almost like he lived a different life. Now, we've all seen The Wizard of Oz countless times. It's one of the most beloved movies of all time, and we feel like we know it pretty much inside and out. But when I tell people, what about the fact that Scarecrow has a gun, people don't seem to remember that, but have a look for yourself.
I believe there's spooks around here. That's ridiculous. Spooks. That's silly. Don't you believe in spooks? No. Why? Oh.
So as you can see, it's right there in front of our faces that he has a gun. Yet every time I question anybody about that, they don't seem to believe me, and they go, I don't think so. And then I have to show them a clip. And I always found it fascinating that something that we know so deeply, even though something's right in front of our face, it doesn't always mean that we experience it that way. And it's in other movies as well, like in Wall Street. We all remember greed is good, but the actual line is greed, for lack of a better word, is good, which is kind of cumbersome. So our memories take that and they break it down to just 3 words, something that's easily memorable, something that is more effective. It feels better in our memories. Same thing with Star Wars. It's not Luke, I am your father. Sorry. It's not Luke, I am your father. It's no, I am your father. But we want to hear the name Luke. We want to hear that in there. Same thing with Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, Played Against Sam. All of these are manipulated by our memories. And it's not just movies, it's famous speeches, it's things we've seen on TV, it's sometimes people think they were at events that are so famous, but they were never really there. So our minds are always manipulating our pasts. So this is what happens to Sean, and he starts to spiral from it. He's very bothered that his past isn't lining up with how he remembers it. His family life suffers, and all this time the dread is building of what is he going to see when he finds the memory of his wife being killed? And that dread just builds and builds and builds to a stunning conclusion that I think all readers will be very satisfied with. Already, the praise for the book has been excellent, and I'm very proud of it. A lot of authors that I respect. Martin Say, who's the author of The Mirror Thief, compared it to J.G. Ballard and Paulo Coelho. Other people have compared it to the movie directors Christopher Nolan and David Cronenberg, as well as authors Don DeLillo and Philip K. Dick. So I'm very proud of the response that it's been gaining so far. That's my book, Scarecrow Has a Gun. I'm Michael Paul Kosowski, and I'd like to thank everyone for listening, particularly all the librarians out there. As a former high school English teacher, I know how important they are to the community and readers everywhere. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. And now we will hear from Lydia Millett. Lydia is an essayist and an environmentalist, but she is best known as a novelist and short story writer of profound imagination and encompassing empathy, moral perception, and mordant wit. A Guggenheim Fellow, she has written 4 books for young readers and 14 works of fiction for adults, including Mermaids in Paradise and Sweet Lamb of Heaven. Lydia has won awards from Penn Center USA, the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Her books have been finalists for the National Book Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and the Pulitzer Prize. Her previous novel, the acclaimed A Children's Bible, was on many Best of the Year lists. Her new novel, Dinosaurs, will be published by W.W. Norton in October. Lydia lives in the desert outside Tucson, Arizona, and we are thrilled to have you here today. Welcome, Lydia.
Thank you so much, Donna. I am rocking from LaGuardia Airport today, so forgive any, irregularities with the sound or anything else. It's a little distracting. So I'm going to just read the beginning of this new book, I think, maybe, 2 pages or something, not too long, and then just say a couple of words about it. I hope not to take too much of your time up with this part, because I can't wait to talk to the other writers on this panel. So this is Dinosaurs, which is about a man named Gil. When he decided to leave New York, he chose Arizona because of some drone footage he'd seen. It wove through the canyons of Red Rock Mountain foothills, over sage green scrub and towering cacti with their arms outstretched, then up into the higher elevations, where the forests ponderosa pines. Sky Islands was what they called those desert mountains. Gil was keenly aware watching the video that he himself would never glide over the rolling landscape with that hypnotic steadiness, would never coast over trees as the metal bird did, close enough to see the clusters of green needles on the pine boughs dip and sway in the wind. He was also aware of the artifice of the soaring choral music the footage was set to. No landscape came with that. Still, it captured him. The desert had an alien beauty that seemed as different as you could get within the lower 48, the opposite of Manhattan. He recognized the pattern. He went to new places because they weren't the same as the old ones. But he wanted to feel the distance in his bones and skin, the ground beneath his feet, not step onto a plane and land in 5 hours after a whiskey and a nap. And not drive either, with the speed and convenience cars gave you. He wasn't looking for easy. He had nowhere to be and no one who needed him. On hiking websites, he researched what he should carry, the weight of camping gear and water and food. He plotted his route painstakingly, spreading out paper maps on his kitchen table, checking each segment against local data from Google. The route that cut sharply south because of the cold that would descend before too long, then straight west, along the bottom of the country from Georgia to Louisiana through Texas and New Mexico. Not much longer than the Appalachian Trail, which people hike from beginning to end every year, but harder in several details, since the asphalt arteries of the nation weren't designed for feet. Then he'd sold his loft in the Flatiron district, bought a house in Phoenix, sight unseen, save for virtual tours and curated artfully lit photos. Packed up his possessions and had movers come and take them there. The long walk lasted for almost 5 months. He rested whatever his legs or back were aching, an ache that got less acute after the first couple of weeks, and stayed in motels when he could find them. The farther west he went, the greater the distances from one to the next. In Texas, even at a pace of 25 miles a day, sometimes 4 days passed between gas stations and more than a week between motels. He had to carry a lot more water then, ration it carefully. Besides the weight of water and the cold, bathroom and shower availability were his most serious problems. Sorry, I have to click do not disturb on here. Okay. He got rank when he had to camp out for too long. He knew this rationally, though he was mostly immune to the odor. And sometimes a front desk clerk gave him attitude. At first glance, he looked and smelled homeless. But his credit checked out and he cleaned up nicely. On the walk, time moved so slowly that he ceased to measure it. It could be relentless in its tedium. Other times, the slowness seemed like grace. At those moments, he looked back on the measured days and hours of his life in the city, its boxes and rows, its tidy compartments, and came to believe that version of time was the false one. A grid designed like the city itself to keep everyone in their assigned seats. So that's the very beginning. And then what happens is that he moves into his new house, and it turns out the house next door has a whole wall made of glass. And just a little bit about how and why I wrote this particular novel called Dinosaurs. I wanted to grapple with the two scales of our social being, which have sort of preoccupied me, especially since the pandemic, the personal sphere and the vast. How a person has to live in a household and on a planet at the same time, or in a neighborhood and in a country. And how our warmth and affection and equally our inertia and sense of powerlessness in the face of this grandiose landscape of information that we're faced with, how both of those can play themselves out at both those scales. And it's a story that starts with voyeurism, not a particularly perverted or weird kind of voyeurism, but the everyday variety that we all know because we watch each other everywhere. In the novel, Gil comes to live next to this literal house of glass and comes to adore the family that moves into it, which I admit is not exactly a subtle metaphor since we all live close to windows like that. They have curtains that can be closed or opened and human figures on carefully lit stages. Sometimes we set them on vibrate, but we always check them the first chance we get. We can't really stay away from our little windows, even when we know that what we see in them may turn out to be a scene of devastation. So anyway, Dinosaurs it's not actually a book about screens or social media, but it is a book about windows and doors, about devotion and solitude and finding company, and not only human company, but the company of the others, the strangers of kind that share our homes and our roadways and our skies. And it's about how we encounter the duty of care, whether to other people's children or nebbish bachelors or the folks who grievously harmed us, or the common birds that once were dinosaurs back in deep time. So it's a story about fight or flight, about that choice. And along the way about feeling grief and being rejected and drinking a bit too much. So I hope you like reading it as well, even half as much as I like writing it. It would be more than enough. And thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Lydia. So intriguing. And now it is my privilege to introduce Anastasia Zadyk. Anastasia is a writer, editor, and narrative nonfiction performer. She lives in San Diego, California, where she serves as director of operations for the San Diego Writers Festival and as mentor and board member for the literary nonprofit So Say We All. When she isn't reading or writing, you will find her hiking, practicing yoga, playing tennis, swimming, or hanging out with her husband and their empty nest rescue dog, Charlie. Blurred Face is Anastasia's first novel. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I'm just going to. Hello. It's an honor to have this opportunity to present my debut novel, Blurred Fates, to this group. As an aside, my parents were both educators, and we used to take family bike rides to the library on Saturdays. And some of my favorite memories happened in libraries. When I was in college, I used to wander through the stacks and just randomly pick books out and sit down on the floor and read them. So needless to say, it'll be a dream come true for me to see my own book on a library shelf. Blurred Fates falls solidly in women's fiction, with enough twists and turns and elements of suspense to qualify it for many readers as psychological or a domestic thriller. My publisher is She Writes Press. The book will be distributed through Ingram Publishing Services and will be released on August 2nd, 2022. I'm proud to say it has received excellent reviews. Kirkus has called it a hypnotic page turner. An award-winning mystery writer called it piercing, gut-wrenching, and gripping. A screenwriter said it's a smart, stunning debut. Look for Zodik's work on the big screen. And a memoirist writing about many of the themes discussed in the book described it as an unerring portrayal of the realities of trauma survival in an enthralling tale of tragedy, love, and betrayal. Before I tell you about how this book came to be and why these themes, I think, make it an excellent book club read, I'd like to give you a quick introduction to the main character and the plot. My protagonist is Kate Whittier, a Southern California soccer mom. Though she started with nothing, at age 37, she seems to have it all. At 19, she was introduced to her husband, Jacob, at a beach volleyball tournament organized by her best friend from college, a guy named Brian, who'd been Jacob's best friend since they were 13. Jacob and Kate fell fast, and Kate found herself in a tricky situation. Jacob's family was established and wealthy. They sailed. They summered at a compound with manicured gardens. They dressed for dinner. Kate's own childhood was the polar opposite of this, and convinced Jacob wouldn't be interested in her if he knew just how opposite it was, Kate decided not to tell him. When we meet Kate, she and Jacob have been married for 15 years. They live in a beautiful house in a gated community near the beach where their son and daughter learn to surf and play soccer. But the whole time, Kate knows she's not your average soccer mom. Hiding from the past and trapped by the unspoken, she waits for the moment she knows is coming, when her toxic older brother finds her, brings her dark family legacy to light, and shatters her world. So why this book? Why now? And why am I the person to write it? As a psych major back at Smith College in the 80s, I was fascinated by the nature-nurture debate and have been curious ever since about how we come to be who we are. Is our fate destined by our DNA? Are we a blank slate at birth, waiting for our destiny to be written by life experiences, or something in between? After graduation, I had a career in neuropsych research focused on the field of memory disorders like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and frontotemporal dementia. But the organization I worked for was also looking at how memories are formed and connected, how they are misremembered and lost, how they can be influenced. It was an incredible field to be in. On a fundamental level, our brains dictate everything about us, our past, our present, and our future. And all of these impact each other. Our memories shade our present perceptions, and our fears and dreams about the future. Our experiences of daily life influence our plans for tomorrow. What happens in our heads influences everything we do and everything we become. Just before I left the corporate world, all that clinical research came home. My mother was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease at the age of 60. And right about that same time, my 15-year-old stepdaughter, who lived across the country with her mom and had only come for visits, came to live with us full time when her mother was finally diagnosed with bipolar disorder she'd been self-medicating for years, resulting in her, unbeknownst to us, having been in and out of jail and rehab for years. Shortly after my stepdaughter came to live with us, her mom died of a heroin overdose. I'd worked in neuropsych research. I knew the statistics. I knew that my risks went way up when my mom was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, as did my stepdaughter's risks for developing bipolar disorder or an addiction or both. And when my stepdaughter started telling me what it was like for her growing up, and then 3 years later, we had to stage her first of many interventions, I kept most of this to myself. living quietly in my beautiful home in Southern California with my 2 children and my husband. But ever so slowly, I began to share what was happening in my life, and I found that so many other people were experiencing similar struggles. But at that time, in the early 2000s, people weren't really talking about it. Without realizing I was writing to heal, I began to write narrative nonfiction pieces that I performed in front of a crowd of strangers, at least at the start. And I was reminded that the personal is universal. Without fail, someone would come up to me afterwards and say, thank you, or something like that happened to me. In one case, when I was leaving a venue, a woman chased me down the street to tell me that the piece I'd read 3 months earlier about my mom's decline had changed the way her family was communicating about her grandmother's dementia. She thanked me and hugged me. She said it changed their lives. And though I suppose I knew it all along, it became even clearer that storytelling is powerful because it makes us feel less alone. It allows us to live in someone else's life for a little while, which helps us gain empathy for others. Sharing stories changes lives. Taking inspiration from my life, I created a totally fictional character, Kate, a woman who might live in my world. I imagined her as the person in front of me at Starbucks, or the woman that always sat alone on the sidelines at soccer games, or ran every day, long trail runs alone, aloof, only a couple of friends. And once I was in her head, I could see that Kate had had this incredibly traumatic childhood, defined by undiagnosed mental illness, abuse, and addiction, and she's kept it together for years. But then, as the prologue of the book says, life can change in the space of a heartbeat. Tectonic plates shift, a violent squall strikes, a weakened vessel breaks, the phone rings, a lie is told. Quite suddenly, an ordinary day becomes the last ordinary day. For Kate, one ordinary day, as she's making dinner in the kitchen that she believes she doesn't deserve, her husband, Jacob, confesses to an act of infidelity in a bar. An act that wouldn't normally end a marriage, but for Kate, it's a trigger. She's overwhelmed by memories, emotions, and fears she can't explain because she's never told anyone, including Jacob, about the trauma she endured growing up. She's trapped by the unspoken, and she's struggling now. She's struggling while she's taking her kids to soccer and grocery shopping. She's avoiding the Starbucks line in case she starts to cry. She worries her volatile emotions means she's falling prey to the mental illness that took her mother from her. She turns to her oldest friend, Ryan, the guy from college that introduced her to Jacob, and she starts to get it together again, but then her worst fears come true. Her toxic older brother calls with the news of their father's demise, and she has to go back to her childhood home, a journey she takes with Ryan, not Jacob. As Kate's past invades the present and relationships collide, the things she can't talk about expand exponentially, and she begins to unravel. Because the book is written in first person, the reader sees all of this from Kate's point of view, including the sessions with her psychologists, which were vetted by 4 separate therapists for accuracy. We live inside Kate's head. We watch her face her demons, real and imagined, and we're with her as she makes questionable decisions, changes, and grows. In the end, as is true for most of us, Kate is not only the product of her nature and nurture intertwining and combining and exploding, she's also the product of other people's natures, nurtures, and dysfunctions interacting with hers. Like thoughts and memories, our fates are ever in flux, impacted by things we can control and things we cannot control. So much of what we see of other people's lives are the trappings, and Kate's life is no different. But ultimately, the reader gets to see that what Kate wants is what most of us want: to feel safe, to feel like she belongs, to give her kids more than she had. Love, safety, home. These are some of the major themes of Blurred Fates, but it also addresses issues of morality and self-definition. How far would you go for love? Do the ends ever justify the means? When does a secret become a lie? And just how much should we look at the past? I hope that it will make people think, remind them that things are often not what they seem, and everyone is processing something, trying to figure it out and come out on the other side. Sometimes these things are harder to talk about than anybody can imagine. There are still stigmas and taboos, and this book addresses one of the most serious of these. And according to many reviewers, Blurred Fates is unputdownable. It's an engaging read about important psychosocial issues. I didn't set out to write a book that read like a thriller, but I'm happy to have written something that addresses things that matter to me in an entertaining, page-turning fashion. Thank you again so much for having me, and thank you to everyone listening. And I'm looking forward to speaking with the other authors during the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Anastasia, and welcome everyone. Let's turn our cameras on, if I can get mine to work. Yes, there we go. There's was in and out, but it snaps back. So I'm intrigued by how much memory plays a role in each of your books. Each of your novels are first-person narrators who are somewhat haunted by their past in one way or another. Michael, let's begin with you. And can you talk, I mean, memory is all about what Scarecrow Has a Gun addresses. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what inspired you to examine memory in the high-tech way that you do.
Yeah, sure. Well, like I said in the beginning, it was just trying to write a memoir. And what bothered me most about that is I realized how much of memoirs are fictionalized, that how all memory, in a sense, is fictionalized. And that I really struggled with that because I wanted to paint as accurate a picture of my childhood as possible. And I started realizing that's not possible, that whenever we talk about our past, any memory we have, it really should come with the tag that it's based on a true story. Anything that we say, anything that we remember, that we talk about is not as we reveal it. And it took a while for me to come to grips with this. And I wanted to try to get it all out in this book. I started reading a lot of philosophers, Rene Descartes, John Locke, Bergson's Mind and Memory, and a lot of sociology experiments, memory experiments, which pop up in the book as well. So I was trying, this is me trying to figure out, how do I write my memoir and how do I understand memory? And I think now, after writing the book, I'm at a little bit more of a comfortable place with that. Oh, wait, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Michael. When Lydia back. Okay, I think I'm freezing a bit. Hi, Lydia, can you hear me?
I can.
So Lydia, we're talking about memory, and I was thinking about your narrator, Gil, and how he's haunted by memories, both back in childhood and as an adult. And I wonder if you could talk about the role the past plays in his life, and not to give anything away, but as constructing his character.
Yeah, I mean, he lives in this perpetual sort of wistfulness, and at the beginning he sort of is a person who's never felt very beloved, even though he himself is actually very loving and affectionate, and he is quite preoccupied with this woman who didn't love him as much as he loved her. So in the beginning of the book, it's almost as though he has always existed in this sort of unrequited emotional space where he finds himself in a position of isolation because either his parents are absent, then his grandmother is absent. The only people he knows well are sort of paid to work for him at the beginning, and so at the beginning of his life. And then also in the present tense, this has been transformed, and he he's sort of finding this new family that's not his real family, or he's coming into community or something out of this isolation. And yeah, and so I mean, I actually think, you know, all memory is a fabrication anyway. It's always a fabrication. It's always a narrative that we imprint on top of, you know, present and empiricism and all that. You know, it's always got its own shape that's particular to our interpretation of the world. And in Gil's case, memory is sort of a place of sadness, and the present tense is what consoles him.
Yes, thank you. Anastasia, in your presentation, explored memory in a very psychological way and talked about writing nonfiction. I wonder how turning to fiction helped you sort of dramatize these questions of memory in new ways for yourself.
Yeah, like Michael said, I've written a couple of narrative nonfiction pieces about family memories, and one of my stories was actually about gerbils, but it wasn't about gerbils at all. It was about the fact that my 4 siblings and myself, we all had very, very different memories of our childhood around our gerbils the family had. And in constructing the story, I realized that it is, as Lydia just said, you know, we take what we remember, we all have a framework for it, and we put our memories into that framework. And because everyone brings in different, and I think a lot of times psychological frameworks that, oh, I was this kid, so all of our memories fit that image of ourselves. And I realized that in a lot of times for myself, that it's like layer peeling for me. I'm especially when there's something traumatic in your past, it takes a while for you to be in a place to peel back enough of the layers to get to what you remember as the true memory. And again, that has been impacted throughout your life by various events and things that are happening in your life and the lives of the people around you. But ultimately, that's what I was trying to do in this book, was to peel back all of the layers so that this character could not free herself, but at least face what had happened to her. I realized that for me, this whole idea of being trapped by the unspoken is really powerful, because I think that we can all get trapped in our own lives because the things that we don't talk about end up controlling us. And that's something that I wanted to explore with this character. So fiction allowed me to do that.
Yes, thank you. So Michael, coming back around to you, you had a similar experience turning to fiction to deal with these questions for yourself. I was also curious about how different it was for you to write a novel for adults. And, you know, it's a thriller. I mean, there's some really gritty moments throughout. How different that was from writing your books for young people that are, there are a lot of adventure in them, but they're for kids.
Right. Well, you know, I initially started out writing adult books, and that's where my heart always was. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff I was writing was very avant-garde or dark and edgy, and I was having trouble. And you know, it was 1,000 pages long, and I was having trouble getting it published. And so I went to children's literature, and because I feel like that's a little freer for me, because it allows your imagination to go in different directions and run wilder than you can in adult fiction, I feel like. Although I do get the sense that that's changing more now. You see more of you know, a blurring of the two. But this is where my heart is and my passion, and I'm going to continue writing more adult works. I just feel like I could comment better on society and on the things that plague me, whereas with the children's books, it's more of a generalized I want to capture a general feeling and emotion, something that kids can relate to. And with the adult books, it's something that I can relate to and I need to work through. So that's the difference with those.
Oh, that's great. I'm sure when you go back to children's books, they'll have like a new dimension probably. Yeah. Lydia, you know, I've been reading your novels from the very beginning and always been very touched by your sense of the largest possible living world, your feelings for animals. I thought about your title a lot, Dinosaurs. Partly it refers to the birds that are descendants of dinosaurs. And I wonder though, if you could talk about your characters' relationships to nature. Gil reminded me very much of T from How the Dead Dream and Ghost Lights. And you have these characters that have this, you know, incredible feeling about animals. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that in your fiction.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big subject, but thank you for reading so many of my books, by the way. You are the best reader. Tremendous. Anyway, so Gil, like me, actually, someone who grew up really urban, and I mean, I spent summers on a farm down in Georgia when I was a kid, but the rest of the year lived in Toronto, and just a totally urban neighborhood. We had big maple trees and, you know, squirrels, and we also had many rodents, not actually gerbils, but we did have guinea pigs and hamsters and mice in our house and stuff. But really, I never went camping as a kid. You know, we never went hiking. My father was just very dedicated to the city, and you know, didn't even have a driver's license, for example. So devoted was he to the subway and to big cities. So Gil is like that in that he comes to this late in life. He comes to nature late. He comes to the desert only first as an adult, the way that I did, because I fell in love with the desert from being a city dweller in New York and Los Angeles and Toronto. It just all of a sudden became this place of the sublime for me, and still is. Like, you know, I lived there still 23 years after I first went there for what I thought was just 2 or 3 months, because I loved it so much that I stayed. And so he brings to nature not the sort of familiarity and complacency that some of us have, being surrounded by it all our lives, and I sort of took the nature that did exist in my city quite for granted growing up, you know, and didn't really think it was anything special. And coming to the desert as an adult, it's as though it's like a whole new world. It might as well be a different planet, you know? And so Gil is a little bit like that. And actually T is a bit like that too, because that character in that other book comes from a place of like worshiping money and like fetishizing money, and comes to nature from a total disinterest, sort of. But anyway, that's an old book. I'm not supposed to really talk about that. But yeah, so really I have a pattern of writing about people who, even though I'm not that interested in writing about my own life directly, who do have that common trait of having come late to the world of wilderness and the wild. Although I do think we all grow up loving animals in our way. I can't say we all, but most children do grow up surrounded by animals in their iconography, and that's incredibly important to us too. So I guess I and a lot of other urban kids kind of come to the larger world of nature, the sort of universe of nature, through the critters that are our childhood companions.
Yeah, so I think about, you know, all the kids' stories are animals, and we make, you know, we sort of use animals as metaphors for everything, you know, busy as a bee, you know, sly as a fox, those kind of things.
Right.
We don't even know what we're saying, but they're kind of ingrained in the human storytelling.
Yeah. When language was first made out of animals, right? Animal figures.
Right. Fascinating. Anastasia, turning to you. Another question I will ask each of you is about setting and place, and you give us very different versions of families. You know, we've been talking about connection and, you know, the individual versus society or family. And I wonder if you could talk about the enclaves you create in Blurred Fates and their sources and how they maybe change the story for you in ways you didn't expect.
Yeah, so the book is set in Southern California. I wrote it living in Southern California. I did not live in a gated community, but I have many friends who do. And there was just a lot of symbolism, I thought, in the whole idea of trying to protect yourself somehow with fences and gates, and that only protects you insofar as from a physical standpoint, but it doesn't really protect you emotionally. And also there was a lot of the world, a lot of times behind those gates is seen as very perfect. It's very manicured. Everything is bright and green, and the flowers grow up the walls, and everything is it just from the outside looks perfect. And so many of the times, I think I mentioned in the presentation, that we get caught up in the trappings of people's lives, and we imagine that everyone else's life is, and particularly now with social media, that everyone else's life, these curated images that their lives are so perfect. And I really wanted to get at the fact that you have no idea what's going on in someone's head, and you have no idea what's going on in their life, and that this is just surface stuff. And my main character, Kate, her background is she comes from a very poor family, and she spends a lot of time outside because it's the safest place for her. But there isn't really much outside for her either. She sits next to the house and she reads books sitting, with her back against the wall with spiders crawling around her and stuff, because that's just what she has. And so for her, this is a whole different world that she's in, and she doesn't feel comfortable in it. And so that was the other part of it that I wanted to that her impressions of the people around her are shaped by that upbringing that she had. And their impressions of her are that she's not friendly, or that, but it's mostly because she feels so uncomfortable. So I kind of wanted to use the setting as an extra, almost like a character in the book, to kind of place her in a world that she doesn't feel she belongs in.
Yes, I'm going to loop back to Lydia about that, because Lydia, your neighbors, your setup between Gil and Artis and Ted and Tom and Clem in the glass house was such an interesting dynamic. And there were sort of elements almost like a play, like these were two different, like we were seeing a theater in the round of two different households. I wonder if you could, houses have played really important roles in other of your books too. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about homes as stages for fiction.
Oh yeah, I guess I do. Well, I'm sort of preoccupied with houses and with hotels. I'm just fascinated by both those categories of spaces. Yeah, and sort of, I mean, of course, we all write about homes. It's hard not to write about home. Hotels are sort of a different thing. In this case, I really, because there are houses like that in Phoenix and Scottsdale, where this is sort of set. There are these sort of like, they're mid-century modern or faux mid-century modern houses that have large amounts of glass, even though they're in the desert, and it really is not the place for large amounts of glass, actually. Like in many ways, you're creating a lot of problems for yourself. But I like the idea of, just the way that sort of there's so many different mechanisms now and levels for us to watch each other through, and it just seems like everything has become this sort of goldfish bowl of, or like there's this panopticon, like proposed, asymmetrical surveillance, that we're all being subjected to or subjecting other people to, or and you just sort of can't get away from the watching and the being seen to such a degree that the norm is voyeurism now, where like what we used to call voyeurism is now just regular everyday life, right? Like that used to be a sort of category perversion. Now it's just like business as usual, right? So anyway, I'm digressing slightly, but I probably didn't answer you. I don't know.
That was great. That was super interesting. It reminded me of the first time I was in LaGuardia and someone next to me was doing a video call and I could see myself on their screen and I was appalled. I got up and walked away. I'm like, oh my God. Now I wouldn't even blink.
Horrified.
Michael,
No, it's
this-
terrible to see yourself being seen, right?
yes,
So-
I was really upset and it seemed like a violation of everything, even though I was in a public space. Now, honestly, I wouldn't even look. Michael, this is so pertinent to your novel, the idea of surveillance and, really intrusive involvement in each other's life through technology. And your novel, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you were thinking about that and how that helped propel the plot in your novel.
Sure. Part of the reason I said it in New York City is I think if you're going to have a place about paranoia and surveillance, and it's as good of a place as any. I think it amps up the tension and the feeling of it's sensory overload, which plays well into memory. So a lot of his memories take place in Manhattan, and he sees that he's experiencing other people's lives without them realizing that he's observing them, that he's taking in their private moments, and that this is happening to him too. I think that I wanted to play with also the fact that when he's watching the memories, that he dives into such a deep rabbit hole and spiral that he starts to think that people are watching his memories, that he's being watched through the machine, that people are viewing him watching it, but also viewing his memories. So he gets very paranoid about these things. And we do allow people to watch us, and but it seems we're only most comfortable when we're aware of it. We are always being monitored, but it's almost like out of sight, out of mind. We don't think of holding our phones, carrying our phones, that people are watching us or monitoring us, but they are. If it was more in your face, I think that's going to make people even more on edge. And that's what he's starting to feel, that he's on display. And I think that could be very harmful to society and how we could break a person.
Yeah, that's interesting. You bring us into a corporate world where competition and sort of greed, all these power plays are tied into this idea of observing each other and in competition. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the inspiration for the villain.
Sure. Well, there's also a sense of the wealth disparity too. I wanted somebody to show that the elite, the real upper echelon, they live differently than we do, that they have access to things that we don't. And basically saying that you can live a better life, that you can enhance yourself. And that's what Olger is trying to say. He's saying, if you win these contests, that I'm going to give you something that's going to set you above and beyond everyone else. And if you win one of these things, that it's going to move you higher up in the art, the hierarchy. I think that's important. I think a lot of people see life as that the elite have access to things that most people do not. And that's why they get ahead. That's why they're rich and famous and whatnot. And well, if I had their money, if I had the access to their technology and their drugs and medicine, then I'd be that way too. But ironically enough for Sean is when he receives it, he becomes enlightened in a different way, where he almost sees beyond that it's not about a power grab and becoming rich and famous. And he in the end treats it in a different way than what Olger expects.
Interesting. Anastasia, a last question for you. You also explore, I mean, each of you do, Lydia does too, explore these kind of class divides and how people feel uncomfortable sort of in either place where they started out or where they ended up. And how did that shape your characters?
One of the things that's most interesting to me about Kate is that she wants to build a happy family for her kids, but she has no idea what that looks like. And so she's she knows she wants to rely on her husband to help her with that. But she also relies on books. She goes to this therapist to try to like figure out what is, like, even the simplest things like having dinner as a family. She never did that as a kid. So she doesn't know, like, well, what is that? How is that helpful? And so she's trying to put all these things together. But I try to build a little sympathy for her in the sense that, you know, she grew up without, it wasn't just that she had a traumatic childhood, she grew up without a model. And so she's trying to build that for herself. And it's difficult to conceive like that who do you ask if you don't, like, she doesn't know what to say on the sidelines at the soccer game. So it's more than about the wealth disparity. It's also about the disparity in her emotional life, that she didn't have so much of the safety and this idea of feeling that someone was looking out for her. And so I think that that's as much a part of it is a disparity in emotional wealth that she did not have. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and that's such an interesting thing to think about, emotional wealth, and you know, what do you inherit or are you denied? So it does really shape you. And Lydia, this is an interesting parallel to Gil, because he too never had a family. You know, he lacked all those sort of normal family experiences. It makes him a very tender character. I wonder if you could talk about him and his quest to do good.
Yeah, so he's someone who inherited wealth, but no parents because he lost them when he was really young. And then it turned out, and he was raised by his grandmother in a fairly frugal and strictured way. And so he doesn't even really realize that he has wealth until a certain moment in his life. And then he sort of fails to appreciate the wealth. It actually makes him feel very bad. And so his life becomes this process of trying to be, well, as he puts it, trying to be of use, trying to be useful. He can't really rationalize holding down a job because he's taking away that income from someone. And so he ends up sort of dedicating himself, after once briefly being a bartender, to doing these other volunteer sort of tasks, and has a very complicated sort of ambiguous or ambivalent, I guess, relationship to his inherited wealth, which sort of ethically he sort of opposes. Anyway, there's like a moment in the book where he sort of attempts to give away that wealth and is dissuaded by the establishment of wealth managers to which he is connected. Anyway, I think I'll stop there.
Yes, no, we don't want to give away. This is such an amazing story, but he's such a tremendous protagonist, and you find yourself really following along and sympathizing. Well, I think for our last round of questions, I just can't help but ask each of you if you would like to name a writer whom you love, who maybe you were reading while you were working on your books, or just someone that maybe inspired you at this particular junction. Does anyone have a writer's name they'd like to call out? It's a tough question. I'm not asking for favorite writers because I hate that question. Mm-hmm. I'm just asking for a writer who intrigued you at some point.
I'll say Don DeLillo for sure. Definitely the type of tone I was trying to go for, and he is one of my favorites, and certainly a writing style that I aspire to, maybe one day. But definitely I like his tone and his commentary. So that was kind of what I was aiming for. That's what I was attempting.
Cosmopoulos, perhaps?
Definitely, and I would say, of course, Underworld, my favorite. So
Oh, gosh, yes. Oh, thank you, Michael. That's
Thank you.
great. Lydia?
Oh, I don't know the answer to your question. I'm never reading books while I'm writing books that are similar to, so in other words, like I was probably I've been reading a lot of nonfiction, and while I was writing this, I was maybe reading that great book about Humboldt. By,
yeah.
is it Andrea Wolf? Yeah, that
Right.
really great about the famous scientist explorer. So it bears almost no obvious relation to to the book that I wrote. I think I can't like stand the confusion of like similarity,
Right, right. But Humboldt's an amazing figure, and you could definitely find some
So
traits.
amazing.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah. Extraordinary. Yeah.
that's a great book. Thank you. Anastasia?
So, well, I started writing this book. This is a tough question for me to answer because I started writing this book about 10 years ago. It was the one that was put in a drawer for a very long time. So, but I believe that when I first started writing it, I was reading Gone Girl, and it was, and I also read The Girl on a Train, and a lot of those were books that kind of explored the psychological side of the like the whole unreliable narrator, and also the idea that sometimes the character at the beginning isn't likable, and you have to get past some of the prickliness that comes with their characters that comes from their background. So I think those were two books that I was reading at some point during the development of this book, but it has gone through a lot of iterations. And the last book that I was reading when I was doing the last edits before it went to the printer was The Lincoln Highway, which has absolutely nothing to do with what I wrote about. So it's been a long time, lots of books in between.
Great, that's great. Well, thank you so much. It was wonderful to speak with all of you. Congratulations on your books, and I hope you hear from lots of excited readers. I'm happy to conclude this webinar with some information for everyone out there. On Monday, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's title list, certificate of completion, video recording, and a link to these fantastic e-arcs. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit us at booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past programs and register for upcoming ones like those you see here. Not yet a subscriber? Why not? Pair the print reading experience with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com and lock in print, online, digital, and archive access by taking advantage of the special webinar offer to get all of this, including our new magazine, Booklist Reader, for only $75. We would love to welcome you into our group. Patron friendly, library approved, and free with a Booklist subscription. Here it is, Booklist Reader. Booklist's new digital-only magazine highlighting diverse readers' advisory recommendations for all ages. To see and share the latest issue, visit us on booklistonline.com/reader issues. We are very excited to share that Booklist, Booklinks, our other magazine, and Booklist readers recently joined the Overdrive magazine program in participation with Zinio. These are available for your patrons to read in Libby. So that is exciting news for us. Heading to the ALA annual conference in Washington, D.C. this June. Don't forget to buy a ticket for the Andrew Carnegie Medals for Excellence in Fiction and Nonfiction. It's happening, the presentation is happening Saturday night, June 25th in Washington, D.C. at the Marriott Marquis. You'll hear our distinguished winners, Tom Lynn and Hanif Abdurraqib, and our keynote speaker, Congressman Jamie Raskin. Buy your tickets now or at the door. Thank you again to Michael, Anastasia, and Lydia, to the publishers who brought them here today. A huge thank you to our sponsors, Imbrifex Books, W.W. Norton and Company, and She Writes Press. This concludes today's webinar. Stay well, everyone. See you next time.